Yes, Gina.
Good evening to one and all. I welcome you all on behalf of Dadari CP Study Circle and also CA Chandrasekhar Vaze sir for speaking on Code of Ethics and case studies on disciplinary mechanism. So friends, let us understand what ethics are and where are the lapses and how our members fall in trap of these lapses and what are the disciplinary actions or mechanism in place. So let us start with our ICAI motto. Over to you, Parin.
Thank you, Gina.
I think there is some issue at Parin's end. So let us proceed further. After that, we will play ICI motto. May I call upon Kajal to introduce our today's learned speaker. Kajal.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jinal, for giving me opportunity to introduce our today's speaker, CA Chandrasekhar Narayan Vaze. He is practicing as a chartered accountant since 1980, that is since more than 40 years. He is active. He has active participation in the work of many professional bodies of CAs, delivered lectures and written articles on taxation, banking, and allied subjects. He is also also on Code of Ethics of CAs. He has participated in discussions on radio and television also. He has delivered lectures and written articles on Valmiki, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, and many other social subjects. He has anchored musical and other cultural programs as well. He is actively connected with arts and literature. He has directed plays in Sanskrit language and also worked for promotion of Sanskrit language. He is trustee and ex-president of Maharashtra Seva Sangh Mulund, which is 84-year-old reputed organization. He is director and ex-chairman of Jan Kalyan Sahkar Limited. He is also a member of Board of Studies for the subject of Sanskrit in KJ Somaiya College. He has held many responsible positions in many organizations. Of from He is also a recipient of Best Social Worker Award from Senior Citizens Association Mulund. He is recipient of Jal Dastur Award for Best Feature in BCA Journal. I recall of this learning CN Vaze sir. Thank you.
Just again make me the co-host and give the screen sharing, please.
Yes, sir.
A lot of voice is breaking. Is there any problem at your end, or I don't know? Even then, that anthem also I could not hear.
Sir, actually, there was some technical issue. We are playing the anthem currently.
No, don't worry. I thought, is there any problem on my side?
No, sir. And we have made you co-host. So after the anthem, you may start the screen.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Jinal, with your permission, I'll start the anthem.
Yes, please.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामंशो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यतीतश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
Jinal, over to you.
Thank you, Parin. Now, may I request Parin to share e-certificate with Vazay sir? Parin, please give certificate to Vazay sir.
Sure. Vazay sir, due to current COVID times and we are not having physical meetings, this is a certificate for you. Please accept from our study circle. Sir, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, it's a very novel idea for study circle. First time I'm coming across such a certificate being offered before the session. Good system. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, may I request you to start your
Yes. Yeah, sure. Yes. Namaskar and good evening, everyone. Mr. Rahul Nagda, the convener, Mr. Parin Gala, the coordinator, Madam Jinal Savla, Kajal Gala. I think there are many galas over there. Well, thanks all the participants and all the office bearers of your other study circle, other East study circle. It's really my privilege to be speaking at this particular Dadar East study circle, because all my basic training and for CA and all actually happened at Dadar, and I have a special sense of belonging to Dadar. And moreover, in your first RRC of CVO, I was the only non-CVO participant. So I have a great attachment to the CVO study circle. Well, today's topic, as you know, is Code of Ethics, disciplinary mechanism and case studies, because whatever I'll be speaking is with the help of case studies and examples, because I believe that example is not the best way of teaching, but example is the only way of teaching. Therefore, whatever I have to explain is not only the principles. I am not giving a pravachan or anything on ethics, but it will be a very practical and lively sharing of experiences. At the beginning, I am just giving a note saying that actually there's a new code of ethics that has already come into effect, but many of those topics of the new code of ethics have been rather deferred. And moreover, most of them apply only to the auditors of the listed companies. Therefore, I am not focusing on the new code of ethics. I am just having the basic code of ethics, which is of course still valid and still in force, and the principles of disciplinary mechanism. The motto song, as we all heard and we always hear in all our study circle meetings, is of course saying that Ya Esha Sukteshu Jagarti, that means he who is awake when the entire world around is asleep. And friends, our profession has become so vulnerable and it is being attacked from all the sides and all the angles that you really need to be always awake and alert and agile. And therefore, this motto song, which is adopted from Kathopanishad at the advice of Maharshi Aurobindo, is really should be an eye-opener for all of us. I'll be sharing the experiences which will be really very nightmarish and eye-opening. And it is an appropriate time. I must compliment Dadari Study Circle because now is the time for signing of balance sheets, tax audits, and other things. So what precautions one should always take and bear in mind is what is I am going to explain to you with the help of examples. Now, friends, this code of ethics, as you know, is basically the set of values, and it is accountability to oneself. Code of ethics is not only a philosophical or a theoretical thing, but the practical aspects which are there are of day-to-day relevance to us, and therefore, please try to understand that this is the foundation of our profession. Our profession is based on credibility, and Yeshu Sukteshu Jagarti is described in some other words as eternal vigilance is the cost of independence. See, our profession always boasts of and always desires for independence. We are auditors. As auditors, we always need to be independent. We cannot be biased or prejudiced. And if you are independent, if you want to be independent, if our country, for example, wants to be independent, then our army and our soldiers are always vigilant at the border. But it is not enough that only the soldiers and the army is vigilant. We, every citizen, need to be vigilant. And that's the message of this presentation of Code of Ethics. So eternal vigilance is the cost of independence. If you need to be independent, then you need to be vigilant. And in the Code of Ethics, you must also remember that you are either ethical or unethical. There is an in-between stage. You don't say by and large I am ethical. By and large you are ethical means you are unethical, because at times you will be compromising on your ethics. People always complain as
Rahul, you there? Jinal?
neither by the regulators nor by the profession, nobody. The clients never want it to be true and fair. But the businessmen never want it to be true and fair. But it is our duty. We are financial police. And therefore, the basic foundation of credibility, and we must recognize the value of our own signature, which unfortunately we are underestimating the value of our own signature, and we are allowing the people to take us for granted. That's a very bad sign of our profession. And the society expects, in fact, society, people at large complain to the institute, although ours is the only profession where Code of Ethics is very strictly enforced. But there also society complains, people complain that in your institute is very mild, they take very lenient view, they take very long time to dispose of a case, the punishments awarded are very mild. Therefore, it is the expectation of the society that it should be enforced very strictly. In fact, to the complaint that people always make that why we alone should follow the ethics, let all the people follow the ethics, then only we will follow. That's a wrong way of thinking. Once Swami Vivekananda was asked this question, and he said, it is like standing on one bank of the river and saying that let entire water flow away, then only I will cross the river. Remember, friends, you are the intellectual leaders of the society. You are not the followers. If wrongdoers are doing on this wrong track, then you cannot say that I am following that track. It is your duty to bring them on track, on proper track. So the outsider's perception is that this particular code of ethics should be enforced very strictly. Now, as far as the theory or philosophy is concerned, this is perhaps the last slide, then I will go over to the examples straight away so that will keep you awake. Now, ethics, as you know, are as old as the human civilization. Ethics are there everywhere. Even the animals have ethics. Even the underworld people have ethics. They say, "Hamare bhi kuch usul hote hain." So even underworld also there are ethics. So it is all the more necessary that we, the respected and dignified profession as chartered accountants, we should follow the ethics. Only then the society will be in a proper discipline. Now, in Taittiriya Upanishad, there are three sayings or three scriptures where we can find the foundation of our ethics. First is Satyam Vada. Satyam Vada means speak the truth. And what we certify, friends, is the true and fair view. So we are basically connected with the truth. What we give is not our opinion, but we give what we certify, what is the true picture, what is truth. This Satyam is obviously not the Satyam Corporation, but Satyam is really the truth. Then Dharmam Chara. Now Dharmam is not merely the Dharmam is not your way of worship of God. But Dharma is not Upasana. Dharma is basically the duty. So follow or discharge your duty religiously is the second message. That means Dharmam Chara. And the last is again of very practical relevance. Swadhyayat ma pramadha. That means never commit any default in your continuous studies. And friends, that is nothing but our CPE. So remember that these principles were enshrined thousands of years ago in our Indian culture, and especially even the CPE also was envisaged at that time. So that underlines the importance of CPE. Unfortunately, chartered accountancy profession is perceived or is viewed as सब manage करने वाले लोग हैं. People say, अरे ये चाहिए ना तो किसी CA को पकड़ो और करा के लो. This is the image of our profession in the society. तो CA को पकड़ते हैं और करवा लेते हैं. That means we are taken for granted. Now, if you are taken for granted, where is your independence? Where is your dignity? Where is your respectability? Where is the value of your signature? So, what is the present image? Present image is that, now before I go to this, now I will share with you one or two very, very important lessons that you should always bear in mind while practicing. Remember, friends, when you are in the profession, do not do anything in good faith. As a professional, you should never do anything in good faith. And I'll give you one or two examples. See, husband and wife both were chartered accountants, both were practicing as proprietary concerns. Wife did the audit of a particular cooperative housing society for 3 years. Then there is a concept of rotation in the cooperative sector. So the husband did the audit for 3 years. And in the 8th or 9th year, there was a divorce petition between the two. And the wife filed a complaint saying that the husband took the audit without communicating with her, means without communicating with the previous auditor. Therefore, no relationships are permanent now. Earlier, there was a sanctity to the relationship of husband and wife at least. The spouses at least was considered that they will remain together. But now even that is lost. So we are in the Kali Yuga. So in Kali Yuga, no relationships are permanent. And therefore, please be aware that if you take anything for granted as far as relations are concerned, 95% of the cases or the complaints, I assure you, are arising out of the disputes between close relatives or close partners or close directors of some private limited company. And therefore, once there is a dispute between two parties, the chartered accountant is the softest target. He can be made easily a scapegoat. So the two disputing parties, they believe that if they harass the chartered accountant, then they can exert pressure on the other party. All the disciplinary cases almost arise out of this particular thinking of the people. So please be very, very particular about it. Do not trust anyone blindly. Do not trust your staff. Do not trust your article. Do not trust the regulator. Do not trust the client. Do not trust even your partner and not even your spouse as far as the professional duty is concerned. Not that they are fraudulent people, not that they are bad intentioned people, but they might not be that diligent as they are expected to be. So your task is very onerous. Remember this, your task is very onerous. So if that is there, then you have to rely 100% on nobody, but only on yourself. Because when there is a disciplinary complaint, it is only up to you to answer, it is only up to you to explain, and council does not have any jurisdiction on any other person other than an individual member as a chartered accountant. We are not assertive, friends. We are too accommodative. So we go out of the way to help a client. I don't know why. That is why people are taking us for granted. Now, even today, people must be enjoying at their weekends, they're enjoying their year-end 31st December, then they will also enjoy at hill stations. But it is only our profession who is working late, sitting late up to midnight or even overnight also and doing their job, and they are not concerned with the efforts that you take. Please excuse me that I am a little fast because this particular topic, it takes for me at least 3 to 4 hours to give you even the basics. That is why I am a little faster. So credibility and respectability of our profession is diminishing. In fact, there was a consulate of a foreign country, and there was a checklist for the things required for the issuance of visa. And the last line read like this: please avoid bringing CA certificates as the same are often found unreliable. So this is the perception of the society, friends. Now, if this is the perception of the society, what is the dignity of our profession? So it is very easy from the dais to say that we are very respectable, we are very dignified, we are very glorious. But is there really any glory at all? Now, in recent years or recent months, there is a controversy now arising in our disciplinary mechanism or the code of ethics. Remember, code of ethics is the terminology that we adopted in the year 2000. Earlier, it was called code of conduct. All other professions and organizations have code of conduct, but we have code of ethics. What is the difference, friends? The difference is that, see, conduct is a very generic term. Conduct can be good or bad. But ethics is essentially a positive term. There is no such thing as good ethics and bad ethics. So there are either ethics are there or ethics are not there. And that is why there was a conscious decision taken by the institute in the year 2000 to rename the thing from code of conduct to code of ethics. But you should never ever do anything in good faith. You should always have what is called as professional skepticism. Professional skepticism does not mean that you suspect everything. But at the same time, you should always develop a habit of cross-verifying everything. Whatever statement you come across, that statement may be made by any person, any senior person, any responsible person, knowledgeable person, close relative. You always have a habit of cross-verifying it. No, not that you are suspecting him, but at the same time, if at all a particular statement is made, then what are the other repercussions? As a logical thinking, then it should be reflected in some other way. There is a cross-reflect, just as a simple example of cross-telling of accounts. If I say that I owe somebody 10 lakh rupees, he also should say corroborative thing that he has lent me 10 lakhs. So this is what is cross-verification. That is the professional skepticism, is one of the parts of professional skepticism. I'll give you more examples of this. But two important maxims you should always remember in our profession. Work should not only be done, but it should be seen that it is done. You should be able to demonstrate with your paperwork, because in the disciplinary cases, the first thing they ask is, where are your working papers? If there are no working papers, then you are losing the case, because you cannot certify something just from the air. So there must be working papers. And next is, faintest of ink is stronger than the strongest of memories. We always say, अरे मैंने उसको 10 बार फोन किया, 100 बार मैसेज भेजा, लेकिन वो रिस्पॉन्ड ही नहीं कर रहा है क्लाइंट. But then the only solution is that you must write to him. And now you have so much of technology at your command. You have emails, you have WhatsApp, you have so many modes of communication. You just write to him that unless he responds within the particular time, he will be the only sufferer, and you are not responsible if he suffers. Once you send this message, see the response. But we don't do it. We just believe in the oral thing. And if it is just oral thing, the client takes advantage of that. He says, you never told me. Or he may say, you told me, but you told me very late. Or he may say that you told me in time also, but you never explained to me the gravity of this. So client can complain any way he likes. The new controversy that is arising in our profession now about code of ethics is that the question is, whether any person who is committing the offense, or you can commit misconduct, whether it is necessary that he does it when he is acting as a chartered accountant, or he is acting even as a normal citizen. For example, if a chartered accountant misbehaves with a female, now whether it is necessary that it should be done in his office or in his client's office or in a CA conference where he is present as a chartered accountant, or he has gone on traveling, he is abroad, or he is attending some private function or a wedding, and there he does something mischief, whether that also code of ethics is also attracted at that time, and the courts have said yes, because simple answer is that how the press reports it. Chartered accountant held for bribery, chartered accountant held for these scams, various scams, like be it bank scam, be it any scam, commodities exchange, everywhere, chartered accountant held for this, chartered accountant held for misbehavior, chartered accountant held for breaking these law. So this or foreign exchange means FEMA. Now, if that is the situation, ultimately who suffers, friends? It is we all that we suffer. If the professional, the entire profession suffers because it is bringing disrepute to the profession. Therefore, the courts have very clearly and categorically held that in whatever capacity you are there, you are the person only, or the ordinary member or citizen of the society, or as a chartered accountant, your attitude, your behavior should be exemplary. That is the example that you should set before the society. You cannot afford to say that, no, only as a professional I will behave properly. When I am in the general society without my professional dress on my body, then I can behave in any way like. No, that is not the correct attitude. Therefore, code of ethics is, it should be in your blood. It should be inculcated in you. That is what is the expectation of the profession, and that is what is the expectation of our institute. And that is extremely necessary to maintain and uphold the reputation of our profession. So we are lacking proactiveness. We are always latecomers. We are always, not a single program of our profession starts at exactly dotted time. That is a very unfortunate scenario. We always wake up at the 11th hour. We start, and then we start demanding extension from the finance minister that we are not ready with the income tax returns or audits. So please give. We are begging always for that. But we cannot put our foot down on the client's record saying that if you don't submit this by this time, we are not responsible even if you commit default. If that courage we are lacking, friends, our profession, where I should say it is a timid or sort of a coward type profession, in the sense there is a crisis of courage in our profession. Now, in fact, more or less all the professions are suffering like this because clients are always dictating. So if that is the scenario, then we must be proactive. Because if we start the audits late and if we raise the queries, client says, at the 11th hour, you are asking me this question. And you see, practically, after the year, end of the year, after 4 or 5 months, you start and you raise a query, something relating to April 20 or May 20 or May 21. They will say, you are asking something which is 18 months old. How can you ask like this? So that means if you had started the audit in time, probably you could have been in a better position and safer position to sign the balance sheet. And then unfortunately, now I'll share with you another example of good faith. There was a chartered accountant who was doing the tax audit of a proprietor. And one fine morning, that proprietor's daughter comes to him. She was married and she said she wants the ITR attested in respect of her husband and her mother-in-law. Now, the normal question the chartered accountant asks as to why it is required, and she says it's some bank loan or some visa purpose. She said some satisfactory answer. Then he had not filed the returns of that husband and mother-in-law, but she had brought the hard copies. So accordingly, he verified on the computer screen that yes, that was correct. And so he attested it and gave it to her as in a proper manner he certified. As per the guidelines of the institute, he certified. Unfortunately, within a month's time, he received a complaint saying that the husband complained, saying that without my written authority, how did you part with my papers to my wife? Now, this is the relationship, all fragile relationships are there because the wife had filed a suit against him for domestic violence. So remember, and then what is professional skepticism? That chartered accountant should have thought, this lady had earlier never ever come to his office. This is the first time she is coming. And there is no prior intimation, neither from her husband nor from her father, who was very much his client. All of a sudden, she comes and asks this. So that should actually trigger some kind of a doubt in his mind. Suddenly, kya hua? If that is the situation, that is professional. I'll also give you many examples of this professional skepticism. Lack of communication skills. We are utterly and miserably lacking in communication. We have not been able to say no to anyone. We are trying to accommodate everyone under all the circumstances. Now, see, simple appointment letter. Appointment letter we are not very serious about. Now, just because ROC we have to upload for the companies, at least we are started taking appointment letter. Otherwise, for a non-corporate client, we don't even insist on an appointment letter. Now, this is very bad, friends. The fees are also not decided beforehand. And we say, अरे फीस का देखा जाएगा. अगर आप ऐसा प्यार मोहब्बत से some professional work करने लगोगे, because that is why people are suffering, then the chartered accountant is bound to dodge the payment of your fees. Remember, unfortunately, unlike lawyers, we don't have a system of taking the fees in advance. But at least there must be some seriousness in your professional services and attitude, so that then only client respects you. Friends, why I am telling is that apart from the monetary loss, he is taking you for granted. That's the very bad point. Even if you lose your fees, that is okay. But if you lose your reputation and if you lose your image, that is more dangerous. Now, I'll give you another very concrete example of good faith. See, there was a private limited company. This firm I am talking is more than 75-year-old firm, a very reputed firm, and all the systems were in place. Now, there was a private limited company whose audit they were doing for more than 25 years. This company had only two shareholders who were brothers of each other, and the elder brother had 60% shares, younger brother had 40% shares. Now, just 4 or 5 days prior to the date of filing return, for example, this 31st December is the date, so he came on say 25th or 26th December, and he said, my brother is busy with his visa and other things. You give me the signed balance sheet. I will go and obtain his signature as usual, and then you submit the return so that there is no problem, there is no non-compliance. Now, he took the balance sheet, he took the financial statements, obtained the signature of his brother, but remember, friends, he did not put his own signature. He had some skimming mind, and he brought it, and in good faith, this chartered accountant put his signature and submitted it to the income tax office, and all the same director who had come to his office filed a complaint on 2 counts, and which are very eye-opening, friends. They are very nightmarish grounds which he had taken. He said that under the Companies Act, 2 directors are supposed to sign the financial statements. In this case, only 1 director had, and he had consciously and deliberately avoided signing. I'm emphasizing this point. But this chartered accountant acted in good faith. So he said that only under the Companies Act, it is 2 directors have to sign. Now, friend, there is a lot of misconception about this among chartered accountants. They feel that if 2 directors have signed, then that's the end of it, and then they can easily sign a balance sheet, which is wrong, friends. Actually, what is necessary and what is essential under the Companies Act is the approval of accounts in the board meeting. And then in that meeting, the board authorizes 2 or 3 directors to sign on behalf of the company or on behalf of the board. So remember, what is of utmost importance, prime importance, is approval in the board meeting, not the signatures of the directors. So this is the first thing. And now, friends, you just imagine, we do everything for our client. Appointment letter only we only prepare, MRL we only prepare, balance sheet also we prepare, everything we prepare, director's report also we prepare. But this small letter, it could be a stereotype letter from every company that these accounts were adopted or these accounts were approved in the board meeting held on such and such date. Secretarial record, we are very, very miserably lax about. Means we are just negligent about the secretarial record. And secretarial record is of utmost importance in a corporate life, because many times the directors keep on calling. I'll come to that example later, but here let me complete this particular story. And the other ground again is an eye-opener, friends, and I leave it to the introspection of each of you as to what exactly you examine in the account. The other ground was that one of the cars of the company was registered only in the name of that elder brother, the director. Obviously, there was a friction between the 2 brothers, friends. So he wanted to bring the brother as well as the chartered accountant into trouble. Why? That I'll share with you later. Now there was a dispute between the two. So he said it was registered only in that his brother's name and it was not registered in the company's name. Now just imagine how many of you, in fact, I have seen unfortunately many chartered accountants signing the balance sheet just based on the ledger entries, just based on the financial accounts. They don't verify the basic document like agreement for purchase of a property, agreement of a purchase of an asset. They don't see whether stamp duty is capitalized or whether there is any contingent liability. Nothing is verified. They just go by ledger entries and they certify the assets, including the immovable property. Now it's a very basic thing, friends, because the basic reason is that we are very much obsessed with the tax considerations. In taxation, they say that depreciation is allowed even if you are not, even if you are you are not the owner, even then the depreciation is allowed. Now, if the depreciation is allowed, because under the Income Tax Act, the consideration is different. Under the Income Tax Act, what is more important is the beneficial ownership. Income Tax Act is not very much concerned about the legal ownership. And therefore, these two considerations are different, but we people are more obsessed in the tax. Whatever is acceptable in the tax, it is acceptable to everybody. That's what our perception is, and that is very wrong. So now I will share with you why he filed a complaint on such flimsy grounds. And you will be shocked. That director had come to this particular firm a few months ago with a request to accommodate his daughter as a dummy article, which the firm had refused. See, the firm was a very senior firm, and the senior partner, who was more about 80-year-old, he said, no, just don't even talk of dummy articleship. Even my son and my grandson and my nephews also, I never allowed them to do dummy articleship. So that person was offended and he filed a complaint just out of vindictive attitude. So you cannot antagonize anyone. That is another bad feature of it, because they have nuisance value. All these people have great nuisance value, and therefore you have to be extremely cautious in doing your duty as a chartered accountant. Signing the balance sheet is in good faith when only the director, which I have just now shared, two brothers. So this is that example which I gave you. Now, one chartered accountant signed the tax audit of another firm of chartered accountants, and there, unfortunately, he saw that he did not notice it, but in the income tax scrutiny, it was noticed. It was some 15 years ago. It was noticed that there was a small negative cash balance on one particular day. Remember, the total collection of the firm was 3 crore rupees, and there was a cash negative balance of 430 rupees on one particular day. And in all your tally packages and in all your technology, this particular aspect was not noticed and not seen. Because you leave it to your junior articles. We always complain, "Arey, articles kuch kaam ke nahi hai. They don't do anything. They are not sincere. They are only concerned with their exam and leave and other things and coaching class." But are we really serious about their training? What we do is, whenever any new article joins, we just send him without any briefing, without any training, to any audit. If there is some senior with him, at least some chance of his learning something. But otherwise, we just tell him and go there and start audit. He doesn't know anything, but we don't take any trouble to train him. Now, this is what is the principle, that is what I think the basic scenario which I have explained to you. I will now come to the technical part. Because the disciplinary mechanism is based on these technical things, Chapter 5 of our Chartered Accountants Act, which was recently amended. Recently in the sense it was amended 15 years ago, 2006. But in that sense it is recent because our basic act was 1949. Now, in this act, there are two schedules to the act. Section 21 defines the misconduct as any conduct or any item of misconduct described in first schedule or second schedule, or any other misconduct. Other misconduct is a very, very wide terminology. Other misconduct has a very large import. Anything that brings disrepute to the profession or it is unbecoming of a professional. For example, even if you break traffic rules, even if you travel without ticket, that also could be a misconduct. if it is very serious and if it is noticed. So remember that your behavior should be exemplary. It should be an ideal citizen. That is what is expected. Then only you will command respect. Otherwise, you will not command respect. And that is, and the respectability and credibility are the foundation of our profession. Fortunately, the younger generation is more serious about it. The older generation, unfortunately, was more accommodative and more submissive. So there, any client could dictate, and there were lesser opportunities probably. Whereas now there are many opportunities, many avenues, and therefore younger generation, as it is younger generation, doesn't come to the profession. They very rarely come. But even if they come, they are more, I think, particular about their own image and the strict following of the rules. But then sometimes they also have to deviate. They will also have to compromise. But at least there is good hope that younger generation is more awake of this and more aware of this. So what is the difference between first schedule and second schedule? In the first schedule, when there are 4 parts, the 4 parts are very self-explanatory, which are appearing on the screen. But all the items of first schedule are those which are concerned with our own, within our own professional brothers, that is members. It doesn't affect the outsider. Say, take for example, we are not communicating with the previous auditor. Then that doesn't affect the outsider. It affects our co-professional. Or we don't verify whether your own appointment is proper or not. Or we do some business or other occupation without obtaining the permission of the institute. Now, these are not the things which are affecting any outsider. Or you advertising, or you solicit the clients. Now, that is only other chartered accountants are affected by this, not the outsiders. So these are called first schedule offenses, and they are considered as of a little lesser gravity, lesser seriousness. The punishments for these are also accordingly a little milder. So that is first schedule. Second schedule, there are again about 15 items. All these are categorized as applicable for the CAs in practice, applicable for CAs in employment, and applicable to all CAs generally. So that is how the classification is in both the schedules. Now, second schedule offenses are like gross negligence or misstatement in the financial statements, or you are certifying the financial statements of your own relative, or you are not keeping the client's money in a separate account, or you are embezzling, you are caught of embezzlement or misappropriation of money. Now, these are all the items which adversely affect the outsider. And therefore, these are of serious gravity. So, second schedule offenses are considered of serious gravity. Now, as a part of disciplinary mechanism, this is the starting point that there are 2 schedules, which I have explained to you. Many people really don't know even what is the difference between these 2 schedules, which I have just now explained to you. Now, there are 4 authorities under the Act. What are the 4 authorities? One is the disciplinary directorate. Disciplinary directorate means disciplinary director of discipline is the head of this. And there are all bureaucrats in this. They are all bureaucrats, remember, and this is the starting point. This is the threshold of any disciplinary case or a complaint. They are not the employees of the institute, but they are the employees of the government. So these are directorate, disciplinary director. There are all chartered accountants and lawyers usually are employed there. They scrutinize your complaints at a basic level. This is director discipline. I'll come to the procedure later. Then there is a board of discipline. Board of discipline is actually for dealing with the first schedule offenses. So board of discipline, we loosely call everything a disciplinary committee, but there is a difference. Now, board of discipline is dealing with the first schedule offenses or first schedule items, whereas the disciplinary committee, which is of 5 members, for disciplinary board of discipline consists of only 3 members, whereas this is of 5 members, and this deals with the second schedule. Now, if the complaint is pertaining to the items falling under both the schedules, then obviously the disciplinary committee will deal with it, which is very logical. So, disciplinary committee is dealing with the second schedule. Then there is an appellate authority. Appellate authority is the 4th authority. That means I'll come to the procedure, but that is appellate authority constituted under our Act itself. So under our Act, unlike in the Income Tax Act, in Income Tax Act, we have appellate tribunal, and after that you can go to the High Court and Supreme Court, which is stated in the Income Tax Act itself. Whereas our Chartered Accountants Act, appellate authority is the final authority. Now, if you want to challenge the decision of the appellate authority, probably you will have to go to the High Court under the Constitution of India, perhaps Article 227. So remember that it is not in the normal course that you approach the High Court. So this is the limitation that we must bear in mind in our disciplinary mechanism, that only appellate authority is the final authority in our particular disciplinary mechanism. So the important pronouncements are, as guidance notes are there, accounting standards are there, standards on auditing are there, statement on auditing. These are all the normal pronouncements of the Act. And the various authorities, which is the binding nature and all. I am not dealing with that because that is not a part of disciplinary mechanism as such. Now, Board of Discipline, I'll tell the constitution of Board of Discipline. Board of Discipline consists of 3 members. 3 members, one is supposed to be, the presiding officer is supposed to be an expert in the field of law or economics. And usually, but by tradition, our president or vice president only is the presiding officer or the president of this Board of Discipline. Then there is one member of the Central Council and the other is one nominee of the central government. So this is the constitution of Board of Discipline. Whereas the constitution of disciplinary committee is that president or vice. Now remember, there is a lot of pendency. So just as in tribunal, we have different benches, or in the High Court, we have different benches. Now in the disciplinary committee also, there are 3 benches constituted for different regions. So various committee, central council members are on the various benches and they deal with the, for example, if something is with the WIRC member, means Western region member is there who is the respondent, then usually the disciplinary committee will consist of members from other regions. So there will be no one from our own region. This is just to avoid conflict of interest. Then 2 members of the Central Council and 2 nominees of the central government. Now the difference between the 2 is that in the Board of Discipline, when there is a hearing that takes place, then only 2 members can deal with it. Means the presence of the central government nominee is not a must. It is not essential, because basically it is your internal matter within the profession. But as far as second schedule offences before the disciplinary committee is concerned, at least one government nominee should be present to form the quorum, because here outside public's interests are affected and they are involved, and therefore at least one government nominee has to be there to form a quorum. Then constitution of the appellate authority. Appellate authority is it is chaired by a High Court judge. Either it could be either a sitting judge or a retired judge. Then 2 ex-members of the Central Council. But which members? They have completed the full term of their office. Like all 3 years, they should have been there in the office as a Central Council member. So 2 Central Council, ex-Central Council members and 2 nominees of the central government. So this is the constitution of the appellate authority. Now I am coming to the most important part of this, and that is the principles, and with the help of examples, I will be dealing with it. In the disciplinary mechanism or in the disciplinary procedures, over the years, certain principles have been evolved. And those are extremely important, friends. And I will be dealing with, again, in the way case studies and the live examples. Now, misconduct proceedings are initiated either on the basis of a complaint or information. Information could be from any source. So there can be suo motu action also by the council. But suo motu action is not just arbitrarily taken. They just first verify what is the truth behind it. For example, there is just a press report about the behavior of a chartered accountant. Then they just don't immediately and instantly start the proceedings. They verify basically as to what is the truth in that, what is the validity of this, and then they may initiate. But it is very rare. Actually, it is from information or complaint. What is the difference between the two? But I'll first give you an example of information. See, usually the regulators like Income Tax Department or other revenue departments, MCA, SEBI, RBI, Cooperative Department, they pass on what is called as information, or sometimes even the banks. If they come across some irregularity committed by a chartered accountant, but they are not interested in filing a complaint, they just pass on that information. And I'll give you a very interesting example of this. See, friends, there was an executor and trustee company, which was a subsidiary of a nationalized bank. Executor and trustee company, you are aware, are executing the wills of their clients, of course, after the death of their clients. So one registers one's will with that company and he appoints them as an executor of their will. Because today's in our Kali Yuga and our nuclear families, there is no reliable relative perhaps they are having that he will execute the will. So they are giving it to the corporate entity. They don't believe in the impartial attitude of any other relative probably. So it is very common that large people having very large assets, they entrust it to the corporate entity for execution. Now there was one particular will, and whose daughter, that lady, she was very much keen to have large property from her father's will. And she said that the will of her father should be interpreted in a particular manner so that she gets more property. Unfortunately, the managers, they did not listen to her, and they executed the will as per their own interpretation. Now she was very much aggrieved, so she filed a complaint to the board of the directors of that particular company. But the board of directors also did not respond. So what she did, she engaged another chartered accountant to find out the loopholes in the financial statements audited in respect of that company. Remember, friends, those financial statements and audit had nothing to do with her grievance, but she wanted to teach a lesson to the directors. So she filed, and that chartered accountant pointed out that some very technical flaws, like some 3 or 4 accounting standards were not reported. For example, AS3 was not reported, or some other, which actually had no impact or bearing whatsoever on the true and fair view of the financial statements. And even if it had, her complaint or her grievance had nothing to do with it. Still, she did like this. So she filed a complaint to the Registrar of Companies office, and the Registrar of Companies summoned all the directors and also the auditor. And they explained to him that actually this complaint is very frivolous and the purpose is different and all that. She is just trying to harass us. So he also agreed that, but he said, now the complaint is before me and your defaults are very obvious. So I must take cognizance. So what he did, they compounded the offense. So composition money is paid, rupees 5,000 was paid all by 4 directors and also by the auditor. And the matter was over. That was what the feeling of all. So chartered accountant was also under an impression that the matter is over. But in all such irregularities, the regulators, as I told you, they pass on that information to the institute's office, and that is treated as information. So they are not interested in filing a complaint against that auditor, because that way they are not technically strictly aggrieved. See, perhaps sometimes in income tax department may file because if the revenue loss is there. If there is a revenue loss, the income tax department may file a complaint instead of just giving an information. So remember that this is the now procedurally, what is the difference? If it is a complaint, then the complainant is throughout in the picture until the case is finally decided. Whereas in the information, so if the regulator files an information, then the counsel or the director discipline first writes to him that you just want to give information or you want to file a complaint. Because if it is only information, then you are out of the picture. Then we will proceed with the whatever information, but you will not be given any opportunity to intervene. You will be only informed of the end result of it, but you are not a part of the proceedings. So this is the basic difference between complaint and information. In complaint, you are there in the picture. In information, once you give the info, so that first option is given, whether you want to convert it into a complaint or not. So this is the difference. So this is the example which I gave you, that in many cases, the regulators, like even stock exchange authorities, bankers, when there are technical defaults of the people and they are not directly affected, still they pass on that information. So information is this is the example of a good example of information. Secondly, there is no, the complainant need not come with clean hands before the council. This is another very important principle. What happens is, friends, that once there is a complaint received against any chartered accountant, his first reaction is that, "Arey, ye complainant badmash aadmi hai. He is a criminal person. He is a fraudulent person. And earlier I have tried to help him so much. But now because of such and such reason, he is filing a complaint against me. He is trying to harass me." Remember, these are the usual scenarios under which a complaint is filed. And if that is there, and if that criminal, now, for example, friends, I have handled at least 8 to 10 cases where the complainant was a confirmed convict criminal. He was behind the bars, he was in jail. Still, the council says, or our disciplinary committee says, we are not concerned with his behavior. We are concerned with they are a very narrow view, and that is the right view. They say, you don't tell us whose conduct is what and outsider. We are not concerned. You tell us whether you have discharged your duty properly. If you have discharged your duty properly, we will hold you not guilty. Otherwise, you are guilty. How he behaves is none of our concern. For that, you may proceed against him in some other court of law, but not here. We have jurisdiction only on our individual members. So this is the most important principle that you have to keep in mind, that the complainant's behavior is irrelevant. Secondly, there is no requirement of locus standi. Now, this also I'll explain to you with an example. That there is no requirement of locus standi in the sense that complainant may not be related with that complaint at all. For example, he may not be a director, he may not be a shareholder, he may not be a regulator, he is not a supplier, he is not a vendor, he is not a service provider, he is not a customer, he is not an employee, he is nobody in that company. Still, he can file a complaint because this is called quasi-criminal proceedings. So since it is not a criminal element, anybody can file a complaint. So, आप ऐसा नहीं बोल सकते कि इसका क्या लेना देना इससे. He is not concerned with this. This is not what you can plead. So locus standi has nothing to do with this. And there I have come across a case where this such person was there, and he was actually, there was a dispute between the directors, and the chartered accountant was actually appointed as an arbitrator, and he did the arbitration proceedings well, and that one particular director had to leave the company. He left the company and he approached another person, a totally outsider, and he hired his services. He was a lawyer, but he was a professional blackmailer. So he filed a complaint, and his complaint was so frivolous that in their stock statement, there were some calculation errors, because the 8 to 10 page stock statement was there, and there were some calculation errors. And there were technical things that cost record is applicable or not applicable. Now, actually, he had nothing to do with this. But he was hired by the director. He only supplied to him the information, and he filed a complaint, and there was no defense that he had nothing to do with this. So remember, friends, that actually the total local person not having a locus and totally a stranger, totally an outsider also can file a complaint. So this is another principle that you should bear in mind. Normally, withdrawal of complaint is not permitted. Was not permitted earlier, but under the new law, withdrawal of complaint is. There are this service code of ethics, conduct of inquiry rules. In that rule, now they are providing that with the permission of the board of discipline or disciplinary committee, you can withdraw a complaint. Earlier, it was not permitted. So this is one principle. Next principle is council has jurisdiction only on individual member and not even on the firm or an outsider. So, for example, you know, this Satyam and other matters. Now, there is no proceeding against the firm. But here, let me explain to you the procedural part. If you file a complaint against a firm, then the director discipline first writes to you as to who is the person answerable on this complaint. So, the firm has to identify as to who is answerable. Basically, the person who has signed, the partner who has signed the balance sheet obviously is into it. Although he may not have seen anything, and he might have just blindly signed based on the work done by his colleagues. But his junior partner may be there, or a director in the firm. There is a hierarchy in the big firms, or a manager or any other chartered accountant employee. they become answerable. So you have to identify, the firm has to identify as to who is answerable. But remember, council has no jurisdiction against the firm. Unlike this, NAFRA, that is that NFRA, they have the jurisdiction over the firms also, but council has jurisdiction only on individual members and not against the firm. So this is a very important procedural point. Now we come to a very another interesting part. We chartered accountants are very much again obsessed with the time barring. So तीन साल हो गया, 6 साल हो गया अंडर द इनकम टैक्स, तो हम we said जान छूट गई अभी. But here आपकी जान छुट्टी नहीं है. Actually here 7 years is very loosely described as time barring. The wording is like this, that the director discipline may refuse to entertain a complaint if he is satisfied that there is no proper evidence. It is difficult to produce an evidence now because of the lapse of more than 7 years, or it is otherwise not convenient to complete the proceedings. If he is convinced that he is satisfied, only then he can refuse to entertain. I'll give a very interesting example. If your default is self-evident, there is no need of any outside evidence. See friends, there was a will prepared by a lady, and that lady expired after 10 years from the signing of the date of signing of the will. Now when she expired and when the will was opened, actually, unfortunately, it was found that the chartered accountant had signed it as a witness, but that lady who was the testator had not signed it at all. Will was prepared, but she had not signed. And the chartered accountant had to be held guilty, because remember friends, when you are signing as a witness, don't take it lightly. When you are signing as an auditor, there you are not a witness. But when you are signing as a witness, there is a very important element, because in your stay on oath there, that this person has signed in my presence. Now, if that is false, if that is wrong, then you are making a fraudulent or a false statement. You are creating a false evidence, and it is self-evident. Therefore, the complaint had to be entertained even if filed after 15 years. Remember, this is the example of how you loosely behave. You behave in, this is another example of doing something in good faith. See, it might have so happened that that lady might be somewhere in the hospitalized, and she might be undergoing some important surgery, and her relative might have come to the chartered accountant's office requesting him to put the signature, and they must have assured him, promised him that they will obtain the signature of that lady later on. But after that, the lady was cured. She then again had a normal life, and then everything was forgotten about the will. So if that is the scenario, and same thing happens in our day-to-day activity of financial statements, we do not insist on the signatures on the hard copies of the financial statements before we sign. So in good faith, we send them for the signatures of the directors. In the meanwhile, we just upload the returns. And there we sometimes we don't have any hard copy signed. And sometimes it is causing very, very serious damage, because there are many complaints coming that the directors have not signed at all. If that is the and there again, I told you that mere signature of the director again is not enough. It should be approved in the board meeting. Now here I am giving you one more very important piece of advice. Many complaints arising because of the dispute among the directors, and usually from a particular business group, only 1 or 2 directors or persons interact with us. Rest of the people are either dormant, or they are technical people. They are not interested in the paperwork. In reality, what happens is that the persons, when there are disputes between the two, the persons who are away, who are technical or dormant, they disown everything, and they say that the 1 or 2 directors who were signing actually had a collusion with this chartered accountant, and they have done everything fraudulently, and we were never informed. We have never even seen the balance sheet. With no meetings were ever called. We have never signed any attendance record. We don't know even what is done, what is filed to the income tax, what is filed to the register of companies. So chartered accountant is actually involved as you can say, he is in hand in gloves with them, those people, and they have committed some fraud or irregularities. This is what is the usual pattern of the complaint. So remember, and that is why the very important piece of advice I am giving you today, that while signing this year's balance sheets, please insist on the signature of all directors on your one copy which you are holding in your office. All directors, all managing committee members, all partners of that firm, audit firm, or all trustees, so that at least they cannot say that we are not aware of this financial statement. So this is at least the first thing, at least you can have the first line of defense. Because otherwise they say that we are not aware, the meetings were never held. They were never presented in the meetings. This is what the normal complaint is. So please take this very important piece of advice very seriously. Then I told you about the 7 years time barring. Then next is the respondent, even if he compensates the complainant for any loss. For example, because of your wrong advice, you are that client had to pay some tax, interest, penalty, etc. And even if you go there and he compensate him, that because of my wrong advice, you had to do so much of this outgoing, and also for getting it dropped, you have to engage the services of some other counsel. All that I am compensating you. Even then, that cannot be a defense, because you cannot undo what you have done. You have already committed a default. You have already committed a misconduct. For example, I'll give you a live example. Many people have now, when it comes for the appellate stage to us for the income tax, incidentally, Code of Ethics is actually my social service to the profession, because basically my bread and butter is taxation, as you may be aware. So there, in appeal, we find that basically the chartered accountant had totally lost sight of section 50C or 56 or similar things. So he had not advised the client about section 50C. And then suddenly the penalties and other tax demands and they appear. Now, if that is the case, then basically you have committed a misconduct, because you have not given a proper advice. And if you are not given a proper advice, you cannot overcome it, or you cannot undo it by just giving compensation to that client. So I hope you have understood this. So, so even if you compensate, it is not material. Secondly, and another very important point, it is immaterial whether because of your misconduct, somebody is adversely affected or not, or somebody has suffered any damage or not. It is immaterial. I'll give you 2 examples of this. These are all case studies. I'm giving examples not from the air or from my imagination, but these are all live examples. Remember, friends, they say there's a charitable trust is exclusively involved in the education, and it is 100% exempt on merits under 143(3), even on appeal. It is held that it is very categorically that it is exempt under section 10 or section 11, as the case may be. Now, if in such financial statements, if there is some discrepancy, then still the income tax department can either file a complaint or they can pass on that information. And I'll give you a very concrete example. When there was some bank statements were not available, some 15, 16 bank accounts were there, 15 out of that 5 bank statements, the accounts were dormant. The management told that chartered accountant, I'm completing very quickly because it's a long story otherwise. So chartered accountant signed the balance sheet. He accepted the explanation of the management that these accounts were dormant, and therefore he did not take any cognizance of that. And he filed a balance sheet, the return was filed, and the tax assessment was done. Everything was normal. No dispute at all in the income tax department. In the next year, those 5 bank statements were found, and there was some other auditor, and there was some nominal difference. The total collection was 8 crores, whereas this difference, which was noticed because of this location of this balance sheet, the bank statements, or since they were traced, it was just 10,000-15,000 rupees, which the subsequent year's auditor, he adjusted in again the opening trust fund, saying that it is the adjustment of the previous year. So he added to reserve and surplus or some such thing properly. Now, even that year's assessment also, there was no issue. It was smoothly done. Unfortunately, in those days, there was renewal for ATG. Now again, they have reintroduced, but again, in between 10-12 years, there was no renewal of ATG. That time it was there. And in that, so in this assessment scrutiny, nothing damaging happened. But in the ATG, because that particular director of exemptions income tax had particular vengeance against chartered accountant. He had a kunness against chartered accountant. So on all such technical things, so he asked that assessing officer to verify what is this adjustment of the previous year. And he explained that this was the adjustment. He said that means both years' balance sheets are not correct, because audits are not correct, because both the auditors remained silent on this. They should have mentioned. See, we are afraid. We people are afraid to make any qualification or even and some qualificatory remark. See, heavens were not going to fall even if that chartered accountant had written that 5 bank statements were not available and therefore those accounts are not reconciled. To that extent, there was a lapse on his part. But we are afraid of writing such things. And second years also, he gave the accounting effect, but there was no comment as an auditor or nor in the notes to accounts about this discrepancy. And therefore, both were held guilty, and both were punished for 3 months suspension. You just imagine a very insignificant lapse. But fortunately, High Court intervened and they were left on reprimand and the suspension was avoided. But remember this, and you have to face the music for 5-6 years. Now in that executor and trustee company, all are scot-free, but the chartered accountant is facing the music for 5 to 6 years now, because any proceeding takes at least 3 to 4 years for completion. So remember that this is the more severe punishment than the actual punishment which is prescribed. So this is the important fact. Another example I'll give you, whether anybody is affected or not. Some person there are discrepancies in the balance sheet, but based on the balance sheet, some banker has financed that particular client, and the client serviced the loan very properly and it was squared up also. So there is no default, there is no NPA, nothing. But banker has noticed that your balance sheets are not proper. And then if at all you have any friction with that banker for any other reason, then he has the nuisance value. He can still file either a complaint or information, although he is not adversely affected. Please remember this. I am emphasizing this again and again, that if somebody is, even if he is not affected, still he can file a complaint, and you cannot plead that because of my misconduct, nobody is affected. It is not possible or not permissible for you to take that defense. So all these practical examples I am giving you can say that you have to eternally vigilant for signing any financial statements. And there is no time barring. Now they are introducing, recently you might have heard in the parliament, they are introducing a bill to also have some time limit for completion of the proceedings. Now the broad procedure, because disciplinary mechanism, now I have explained to you the authorities, I have explained to you the 2 schedules, I have explained to you the basic principles that govern the disciplinary proceedings, and now we come to the broad procedures. Procedure is that you have to file a complaint first. Somebody files a complaint, and that complaint is in a prescribed form I, and with that they pay a fee of 2,500. Then that complaint, which is received by the director discipline, is simply forwarded to the respondent without any scrutiny or examination. And the respondent is supposed to give his written statement or explanation within 21 days. But we chartered accountants are always late wakers. So that means we always wake up on 18th or 19th day. Fortunately, there's a provision that you can get 30 days extension, because we don't do any work without extension. So the 30 days extension is obtained, and then we have to submit this explanation. Remember that in your explanation or written statement, there should not be and you should avoid counter-attacking the complainant. The complainant may be a bad person, he may be a badmash person, but that cannot be your main defense. You have to first write objectively as to what are the complaint items of complaint and what is your answer to that. It will be objective manner. And remember, whatever merits you are having, you have only this one opportunity to place it on record. If you approach any lawyer, what they say is, why we should open all our cards at this stage? Because lawyers always have a calculation in mind that it will be coming in the trial, in the court. And that time they can argue. Friends, that is a wrong concept, because when I explain to you the further procedure, then you will realize Whatever merits you are having, whatever weaponry is there in your armory, you have to place it on record at this stage itself. You don't get second innings. Now, that written statement is sent back to the complainant. The complainant has to comment on it, and that is called a rejoinder. That rejoinder, once it is received, then the work of director discipline starts. So, director discipline, and as I told you, if it is against a firm, they will first try to identify as to who is the person answerable, and then the proceeding will start against that individual member. It could be 2 or 3 members individually together, but not against the firm. I am repeating. Now, once they get all these 3 things, then they scrutinize it. That director disciplines, their assistants, assistant directors or deputy directors are there. They scrutinize it. And in the scrutiny, they might feel that there could be some additional information required. Usually, what kind of additional information required? They ask for working papers, or they ask for audited balance sheet of some other years, or they ask for typical, very common thing is that some of the documents maybe in your regional language, like it could be Marathi, Gujarati, or Tamil, or anything. Or then they will ask you the translation of that. See, any partnership deed is there, or any trust deed is there, or any land records certificate is there. So they will ask for the translation. Another common thing of additional information is that suppose your case is based on some local law, like Maharashtra Cooperative Societies Act or Maharashtra Public Trust Act. Now the people sitting at Delhi, they may not be having that act very handy. So they will ask you, give the relevant provisions of that particular act. So these are the usual things when they ask for. It is additional information. I'll give you some examples of what is the difference between how additional information helps, how additional information brings you in trouble. Then they, after getting all this, they pass what is called as prima facie opinion. That means director discipline writes a prima facie opinion. It's a very detailed opinion. He describes everything. What is the complaint? What is the procedure adopted? What are the respondents' written statement? What are the rejoinder? And what are his views? All that. It's a very nicely drafted prima facie opinion. Now, that prima facie opinion is placed before the board of discipline or the disciplinary committee as the case may be, depending on under which schedule this particular complaint is filed. Now there, friends, suppose there are 8 to 10 items of complaint. The director discipline may feel that out of that, in 7 you are not guilty, but in 3 you are guilty. Prima facie, again, prima facie. Once, but it is put before the board or before the disciplinary committee, they may say, members may say no. They may either agree with the director, or they may disagree, or they may partly agree. So they say no, not 7, but only on 5 or only on 6 he is not prima facie guilty, remaining 4 is guilty. It could be anything. If you are not found guilty at all under any of the items, that means your case is closed. They just write to you that you are prima facie not guilty. Then jaan chhut gayi aapki. But otherwise, even if you are found guilty on even one item, then it goes for the hearing. There is an inquiry, regular inquiry. The proceedings are there, but it's an inquiry. It's not a trial and like before a court. So your counsel can remain present. He can explain. Complainant with his counsel remains present, and a proper hearing. But it's an inquiry, friends. It's not a trial under the court. It's not a rivalry. But they are going to it's a fact-finding process. So in that fact-finding process, they may arrive at some finding. That is, they call it as disciplinary committee's report. In that report, finally they say, no, you are actually not guilty on 8 counts, but on 2 counts you are guilty. Anything can happen. If that is there, then you are held guilty and that report comes to you. Once that report comes to you and if you are held guilty, then you are again given one more opportunity to inquire as to what should be the punishment awarded to you. And that proceeding, only you alone can be present. You cannot get any counsel or any other person with you. So that time आपको उधर रोना ढोना पड़ता है कि ये टेक्निकल डिफॉल्ट है, ये वो है, जरा माइल्ड पनिशमेंट दो, मैं अभी बूढ़ा हो गया, whatever you want to cry, you have to cry there. So after that, after hearing, they pass what is called an order. So I'm just recapitulating the complaint, written statement, rejoinder, additional information, and prima facie opinion. prima facie opinion, then the inquiry, and then the findings or the report. After the report, the punishment is the order, and that order is appealable before the appellate authority. So you can appeal that you are wrongly held guilty, that also you can appeal, or even if you are held guilty, the punishment is disproportionately harsh, that also you can argue. So that way, everything is open before the appellate authority. The appellate authority, as any other appellate authority, can take proper view there, or they may send it back. They may set aside and send it back for the re-inquiry also. So they have wide power, just as the tribunal has, that they set aside the assessment and everything. So same way, appellate authority functions. But it is essentially at Delhi, whereas all other hearings are at the region where the respondent stays or operates. Now, of course, everything is online. That's a different story. But otherwise, the hearing, always basic hearing, takes place in the region where to which the respondent belongs. And the appellate authority essentially sits at Delhi, and therefore it is a very, very expensive and cumbersome affair to go for the appeal, because you have to carry your counsel, you have to incur his expenditure. The hearings are invariably after 6 p.m. So you may have to stay overnight. There could be adjournment. Many things happen, and friends, it is a very, very wasteful sometimes exercise. So one has to be very cautious of the cost benefit of the appellate proceedings. Now I come to the persons authorized to represent, means you can yourself, of course, then any other member of it institute, then any advocate or any member of ICASI or ICWA. Then hearing before the Board of Discipline, the normal hearing which I explained to you, that you can remain present, there is examination, cross-examination. In the second schedule offense, there could be even witnesses. Now suppose there is an allegation of fraud, or there is an allegation of misbehavior, then there could be some witnesses that yes, this person behaved like this, or he was not there at all, whatever. In the criminal thing, whatever just defenses are there, those can be there, and there can be witnesses. But in the first schedule, that is Board of Discipline, there is no provision for witnesses, whereas in the second schedule, there is a provision for witnesses. So this is another important factor that one has to keep in mind. And then the normal hearing takes place. It's a very fair and open type of a proceeding. It's not open to all. It's a closed proceeding, but there is no intimidatory thing, or there is no atmosphere of fear in that. You have to explain objectively, and they give you all the opportunity to explain your case. In fact, even if after you are held guilty, then still you are allowed to represent before the punishment or anything. There's still at the end, up to the end, you can make on representation, so that they are usually entertained. They are doing it in a very fair manner. Punishments. Now there are 3 punishments prescribed for each schedule. In the first schedule, the punishments are of 3 types. One is the reprimand. Reprimand means just a stricture or a warning, like don't do such thing again. You have committed a misconduct, but don't repeat such things. Usually, when you are there is previous auditor's communication, then if it is for the first time, usually they leave you on reprimand. Usually, if it is a repetitive thing, and they are having all the past records also, but if it is a repetitive thing, then they might go for a higher punishment. Otherwise, the reprimand is the first thing. Then under the first schedule, there could be a suspension of maximum up to 3 months. Now, first schedule, bringing disrepute to the profession, is normally falling in the first schedule. But there is another element in other misconduct. If you are held guilty under any other law, criminal or civil law, for which, by any other code, for which the punishment prescribed is more than 6 months imprisonment, then it falls in the second schedule. But if the punishment prescribed under that act, like Indian Penal Code or any other act, like Income Tax Act, if the punishment prescribed is the imprisonment for less than 6 months, then it falls under the first schedule. So this is the difference between if you are held guilty in any other act. But if you are bringing disrepute to the profession, it is falling only in the first schedule, like bribery cases or misbehavior cases, or your involvement in some scams or frauds. Now these are all the items where it brings disrepute to the profession. they bring disrepute to the profession, then the punishment is maximum 3 months suspension or a fine not exceeding 1 lakh, or there could be a combination of both. So there could be fine of 50,000 rupees and suspension for 1 month, for example. So that a combination is also there, and then reprimand need not be there. And the second schedule, again similar thing, reprimand, then suspension for any period of time, it could be even permanent, and there could be a fine up to rupees 5 lakhs. So these are the punishments prescribed under the act. But the indirect punishments are more severe, friends, and those are very necessary. It is necessary to note that then you are disqualified for audits of large reputed organizations like RBI, bank audits, or CNAG audits. You are disqualified. Once you are held prima facie guilty, now friends, another important factor. Now even under the Companies Act, under section 139, you have to give a declaration to the company as to whether there are any proceedings under the disciplinary or misconduct cases pending in the institute against any of the members of the firm or any partner. Now, if you give that declaration and if there are pending proceedings, especially after the prima facie opinion is against you, then the proceedings start. Till that time, it is only the preliminary inquiry. So just a complaint is filed. That doesn't mean that there are proceedings. Proceeding starts only when you are held prima facie guilty. Otherwise, there is no end to it. Anybody can file a complaint against anyone, and that person will be then disqualified. So it can come out of professional rivalry, jealousy, anything. So merely filing a complaint doesn't make that proceedings are on. Proceedings are on only when you are held prima facie guilty. Now, the large corporates, reputed corporates or MNCs, even if you are convinced or you can satisfy them that actually there is a misconduct proceeding against me, but actually it's a very highly technical nature and there is really speaking no misconduct as such. Even then, they may say that, no, we don't want to appoint an auditor who is having a tainted background. So remember this. So now it's not merely the regulator, but even the company itself may be unwilling to appoint you as an auditor. So this is indirect punishment. And you may not get that, or you are deprived of the audit assignment and the fees for maybe 3 or 4 years when this particular proceeding is going on. Now, if that is the scenario, then you can imagine that fine is just 1 lakh rupees, but you are losing your fees maybe 50 lakhs rupees. We don't know. So remember, this indirect punishment is more harsh. Then second is, once you are suspended, and then after that suspension period, you are reinstated, because if you apply again, then you are restored. Membership is restored. Remember, your membership itself goes, not merely certificate of practice. You are not a member, your name is struck off from the members register. If that is the scenario, and if you are restored, then that is the first day of your practice. Even if you are in practice for 30 years, even then that is coming to 0. So that is the starting point of your practice. Therefore, then your seniority is lost and you cannot then train the articles also. So that is another very harsh indirect punishment. And the last is, it's a stigma. Ultimately, your name is published in the Gazette that he was held guilty and he is punished. So that is, your membership is suspended, and that's a stigma. It's a bad reputation to your personal career, and it might bite your conscience always. So remember that these are the situations. Then who usually complains? Remember, all the users of your services, then the financial institutions, banks, then all other lenders, investors, regulators, and authorities are the normal complainants. Secondly, your staff members can complain, your article trainees. Article trainees, I'll give you a very interesting example. See, Mr. A was a CA, Mr. B was an engineer, and both were very close friends, and they were doing a business in private limited company of manufacturing something, some engineering goods. They are doing very prosperous business. A, out of just sentimental reasons, he had kept his COP, but actually he was not practicing very effectively. B's son wanted to do CA, and he did his articles under Uncle A. A was uncle at that time. And because he was his father's friend. Now, he passed his CA, he joined some corporate, everything was normal, sweet and good. But after that, after 20 to 25 years, there was a dispute between the two. Remember, friends, any two relationships, especially in business or when it concerns with money, the disputes are bound to occur. The disputes is just inevitable. And in today's scenario, disputes are bound to be there. And once there are disputes, the first scapegoat is the chartered accountant. So there were complaints against both. A filed complaint, B filed complaint, criminal law, CLB, High Court, everywhere. And B's son, to aggravate the scene, he filed a complaint saying that my boss, my principal, A, under whom I did my articles, he was doing business, he was executive director without seeking permission from the council. So this is what the complaint he filed. Remember, friends, and then what happened? A had no defense. He said, yes, I was the executive director. In fact, that brings me to any very common experience now, that many chartered accountants are under the garb of HUF or under the garb of a director of a privately limited company are doing any sort of business, which is not permitted, friends. If you are the executive director, like only husband and wife are only the directors. And if you are doing the business, then you are signing of the balance sheet, uploading of returns, signing of all documents, all the signing of checks, all that may result into the fact that you are engaged in the business actively. You are an executive director then. Because what is permitted is you are coming to a director simpliciter. You can be a promoter, you can be a a member of the board, you can participate in the board meeting, but nothing beyond that. You cannot sign any documents. You cannot negotiate any deals. You cannot deal with the employees or deal with many other regulators as a representative of the company. So remember that then it is said that you are active, or you cannot even sign the checks. If that is the situation, then it is very dangerous. Or if many people are doing share market activity under the garb of HUF or something. See, HUF, please remove that. It's a nonsense concept according to me. In reality, it never exists. It's only the concept because of these tax laws people are having in their head, but otherwise there cannot be, like you are dealing in the shares, then unless it's a genuine HUF which you can prove, otherwise it is very difficult. And if you are yourself doing everything, then you cannot plead that it is just HUF that I am doing. So please remember that it's very dangerous to do these things in HUF. Then so articles, how they complain, I mean, co-professionals, even the partners have complained against each other. Then total strangers can complain. So again, all their own partners, they can complain. Then complaints may be filed out of ego problems or ego issues, ego clashes. Then invariably, it's an arm twisting measure. That means you have to exert pressure on the chartered. Then the chartered accountants are blackmailed also. And there is an existence of blackmailers also, professional blackmailers. Then there are other exposures and vulnerability, but peer review you should take very seriously. Peer review, because what we people do is, chartered accountants are known to be only managing everything. So even CPE hours also we are managing. So for example, for a lecture on ethics, the enrollment could be 150, but actual present may be only 35. So that's a usual scenario when physical meetings or lectures were held. And because of the CP, even the branch people, the study circle people also, in fact, it is an example of unethical behavior that you are certifying that the members were present. So please remember that you have to introspect at every stage. So unfortunately, we are known for managing everything. So CPE hours are also managed. So that means you don't understand the spirit behind it. So the people go to the police straight away. Now, one lady she had some friction with the chartered accountant, and so from his mobile, because somehow she could lay her hands on his mobile, she was sitting in the cabin, and he went outside, and his mobile phone, the cell phone, was lying on the table. So she did some very bad and obscene and dirty messages she sent from his mobile to herself. And then she took the photograph of that screen and she approached the police saying that chartered accountant is sending me such bad messages, and the poor chartered accountant was arrested and he was behind bars for 5 days. And now he is on the bail. And she also filed a complaint to the institute that such chartered accountants are sending bad messages. So it's bringing disrepute to the profession. So people are now easily, they are understanding, they are realizing their nuisance value. So it is, we are so soft target that anybody can cut. That is why, friends, I never represent a complainant, because filing a complaint and demolishing a chartered accountant is very, very easy. Every day you are committing some misconduct or the other. When there is a complaint against a chartered accountant, he says, "अरे 30 years में practice कर रहा हूँ, अभी तक आज को एक भी complaint नहीं आया." The only answer is that you should consider yourself lucky that 30 साल में कोई complaint आपके against हुआ नहीं, because जो पकड़ा गया वो चोर. Otherwise, you are committing misconduct every day. Remember, friends, remember this. So press, they approach the press, and then immediately there is a defamation, and the defamation is not only of that individual chartered accountant, but the defamation is of the entire profession. That is why it brings disrepute to the profession. And they also approach consumer forum. Now, peer review, although it is not a foolproof answer, but it's, if you take it in a proper spirit, probably it is a preventive step, and you should take it in a proper perspective. Then there are some clauses. Actually, ideally, I should deal with some important clauses. I'll just highlight one or two clauses in the first and second schedule, and then I'll conclude, so that if there are any, because the procedural part is over now, the disciplinary mechanism as such is over, but I'll give you some, but before I close, I'll give you two examples, very interesting examples, because now, before I deal with the individual, because it is an endless, it will take 3 to 4 hours to, if I deal with the individual project, but two important cases I'm sharing with you. One is, there was a 600 crore turnover company, and they were having some mining operations, and their head office was at, corporate office was at, in Mumbai. Now, they had taken some loan from a PSU bank, 100 crores of term loan. Now, it went bad, it was an NPA, and the first thing, usually all these big banks, nationalized banks, although they are themselves hand in glove with the management and they grant loans in a very fishy manner, suspicious manner, even then, to save the skin of their own managers, they file a complaint against the chartered accountant first. Likewise, they filed a complaint. This firm had maintained excellent working papers. This I am sharing with you in the context of the clause gross negligence, because it is the most dangerous clause. Gross negligence, and now they have added lack of due diligence. Both things go together. Now, what is the difference between lack of due diligence and gross negligence? That I am telling you now. So, we filed working papers. Now they received only, when the director discipline, as I told you, he scrutinized the papers and the respondent's explanation. He sent two questions or two information as additional documents. He asked whether you had written to the bank for confirmation of balances. That was one. That the answer was that they said, we are having photocopies of all the bank accounts, and they are reconciled. So there is no question of we writing to them separately. So I said, very good. Then second question was whether you had written to the debtors for the confirmation of balances. And there they said, no, we had not written. Now remember, friends, when we have basic audit paper, we have studied that third party evidence you should gather. Even there is an essay on that third party evidence. I understand that there is no, practically it is impossible. Hardly anyone actually goes to attempt it. And for 30, 40 years, we write only one remark: all the balances of debtors, creditors, loans, lenders, customer, depositors, everything is subject to confirmation. But we can never show that we have even attempted to get the confirmation. Now, this is the time when you are signing the balance sheet, at least create a record that you have asked for the confirmation. Now, friends, I come to the real true part of the story, that they said that now it is a CBI matter, and it was so revealed that each and every document in the company was a fabricated and a false document, including the bank statements. Remember this, friends. It's a very eye-opener. And then, so had they returned to the bank, now remember that so far as they have taken the bank statements copies, you cannot say that they are negligent. So there is no gross negligence. They are diligent in that sense. But there is a lack of due diligence because they never verify. What is professional skepticism? Here it comes. That you verify with the bank, at least out of 8 statements, you could write to the bank for 3 or 4 major accounts and we confirm, get the confirmation. There are frauds sometimes which are occurring as to there are deposits and withdrawals of common same amount. It's a contra entry and there is a, it is masked, the bank statement is masked and then xeroxes are taken. Recently, there was a fraud in a very reputed hospital in our Mumbai city, and where the fixed deposits were encashed fraudulently by the accountant by obtaining the signatures of the trustees. It was a trust, and exactly same amount was withdrawn, and it was a contra entry. Therefore, end bank statement was not affected. Bank balance was not affected. So remember that in bank statements also the professional skepticism or the suspicion says that why there is a gap in these entries, why it is masked. Now that is, if we had seen it properly, perhaps this fraud could have been exposed much earlier. Similarly, writing to the debtors. So this is the difference between gross negligence and lack of due diligence. I'll share with you one more case which highlights the difference between pure legality and the misconduct, but here or unethical thing. Now, as the items are self-explanatory, but the most common is clause number 8, accepts any audit work without communicating with the previous auditor. Here, previous auditor means not the auditor of the previous year, but any member who had this position last. For example, last 3 years there was no tax audit because of the turnover, low turnover. 4 years ago there was a tax audit. Then this year, if you are appointed as an auditor, then you have to trace that old auditor and you have to write to him. Moreover, you have to write to him before accepting the audit. Another important factor here is that you have to, now you can send you an email, but otherwise it was only registered post AD that was earlier prescribed or recommended. Now email also, if you write to him on email, it should be on this email, last email ID, which is available on the CA Institute's portal. On that you have to write. Even if you write to another email, but you can prove that it has reached him, then perhaps you have a good defense. But otherwise, you have to write in the email ID which is appearing on the CA Institute's portal. UDIN and other things are of course there. But another important thing is that his undisputed audit fees must have been paid. If you accept the audit, when the undisputed audit fees have remained unpaid, and it is only audit fees, it is not other professional fees, and what is undisputed, it is defined. Undisputed is the one which is appearing in the balance sheet and which is signed. A balance sheet is appearing as outstanding and it is signed by the auditee directors, then it is called undisputed audit fee. Now, if it is a cash system, then obviously you have every means and sources to verify whether the fees have been paid. Otherwise, you can write to that auditor. So when you are writing for so-called NOC, remember there is no such thing as NOC as such. What you have to write is only communicate in writing with the previous auditor. That there you can add whether any of his undisputed audit fees are unpaid. You have to add that so that you are safer. Now, if that is the case, then this is as far as this clause 7, 8 is concerned. There are many other aspects. In fact, even on this one single clause, I can speak for 1 hour because there are so many interesting cases on that. Or he accepts the audit, clause 9, accepts the audit without first ascertaining the requirements of the Companies Act 1956 or 2013. Then there are other things, soliciting or advertising. There are many. On each and every clause, we can speak for long. Then clause 11 is important. Engages in any business or occupation without obtaining the prior permission, unless it is a blanket permission or a general permission given under Regulation 190A. So that is as far as first schedule is concerned. Then disclosing the secrets of the client without the consent of the client, any information to an outsider, or you are getting emoluments, you are giving something as a kickback or a bribe. So these are all normal things which are there. I'll share with you now one more case before I conclude. Then these are all self-explanatory. Now in the second schedule, this is the schedule, part 4 of the first schedule is that if you are held guilty, I have already dealt with it. If you are held guilty for under any civil or criminal code, which is punishable for imprisonment of not exceeding 6 months, then you are falling in first schedule. Otherwise, it is in second schedule. And brings disrepute to the profession is the one that is really the other misconduct. So even the dowry cases are here under other misconduct. Then the second schedule, most dangerous, is clause 7. So clause 7 says, does not exercise due diligence or is grossly negligent. This I have explained to you just now. Clause 10 is again of practical relevance. If he fails to keep the monies of the client in a separate bank account, so that he is not mixing up with his own money and he is not utilizing it for his personal benefit. So that is, but if it is to be spent immediately, for example, you receive it for payment of advance tax and in a reasonable time you pay it off, or he gives you some money for formation of a company and you disburse all the expenses of stamp duty, registration, everything. So it is meant for immediately spending. Then you need not keep it in a separate account. But if it is given for some investment or some long-term liability to deal with the long-term liability, then here you have to keep it in a separate account. That is as far as, and then clause 5, 6, 7, 8 go together. So 5 is the misstatement or the material fact which is known to you but you don't disclose. Like for that case I told you that bank statements were not available. So this fact is material, so that you have to disclose. So if you don't disclose, then it is a material misstatement. So or you are concealing something which you are aware. So this is as far as the schedule. This is last. Finally, I conclude with another story, which is again an eye opener, and it brings out the difference between the legalistic thing and the misconduct or unethical thing. And the story is long, but I'll keep it short. In fact, I just mentioned to you here that in Bombay Chartered Accountant Journal for last 8 to 10 years, every month I have been writing Ethics and You, just a 1-pager, 1.5 pager. It's a dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna. And there I describe all these principles and all these live cases. So if you happen to read BCA Journal, you may find some value in that. And that Jal Dastur award was meant for that, my feature of Ethics and You. So you can take benefit of that if you are interested. Now, here, one chartered accountant, he knew that his cousin was a person of bad behavior. That cousin wanted to raise some loan from the market, and he wanted some basic margin money of 10%. So he requested his cousin, who was a chartered accountant, to issue to him a check of say 50 lakh rupees, and he wanted to raise a fund of 5 crores for some business. That person was a vagabond, that cousin. Now he did not get any money from the market. So what he did mischievously, he deposited that check, he got it bounced, and he filed a complaint under section 138. Again a good faith, friends, again a good faith. Each and every act you do in good faith, it might misfire. So he filed a complaint under 138. Now that was disputed, it will go to the High Court. Perhaps in the High Court, having all regard to all facts and circumstances, perhaps he will be acquitted. Remember, what happens in the legal proceedings is not necessarily having impact on the ethics. For example, because of your wrong advice, penalty under of concealment 271(1)(c) or 270(a) has been levied. Now, you get it dropped in the appeal, and there are many ways and ways of getting it dropped in the appeal. It could be Kar Vivad Samadhan, it could be that some technical flaw in the notice issued, or it could be some magic that you perform there. For hook or crook, you get the penalty drop. Even if you get the penalty drop, you cannot create the penalty actually lagaya hi nahi. If that is the situation, still you are guilty because the basic misconduct is that you have given a wrong advice. So here also, this check was bounced, and there are two unethical parts. One was that you had issued the check when you knew that there was no balance in your account, because the understanding was that this check would never be presented. And secondly, that your check would have misled some other person to give in finance. So these two are unethical parts in that. So remember this, that this is the situation where there is a difference between pure law and unethical or ethics or misconduct. So this, I think, I must thank first Preeti Madam also. Let me congratulate her on her grand success in the elections. She only initiated that I should speak in this Dadari study circle. It's a Parin Gala and all the office bearers, conveners, and all the participants. And I wish you a very happy new year 2022 that is coming, and you have a safe signing of balance sheets, and that nobody will ever be caught in the clutches of disciplinary proceedings. This I am cautioning you that be careful, so that prevention is better than cure always. So please do your work diligently. Satyam vada, dharmam chara, and svadhyayatma pramadha. And with this, I conclude. If there are any questions, I'll answer. But thank you all, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Vazay sir. Any questions? Participants can unmute themselves and ask sir. I think there are no questions. Once again, we thank Vazay sir for accepting our request, accepting our invitation to speak on the most required topic of Code of Ethics and Disciplinary Mechanism. On behalf of Dadari CP Study Circle, Vazay sir, we thank you once again.
Thank you.
And we always look forward for you to be our speaker in any of the forthcoming events. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and all the best to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.